The hope was to. Chapter 1. Experiments. This is my confession, my account of my own life experience. I gave blood, life, comfort, and companionship to the darkest places in my own human soul. My name is Elric Khan, and this is the story of how my cancer was simultaneously the best and worst thing that could have happened to me. I have found that you can torture yourself into becoming a new and better person with the right chemicals, agreements, and stimuli. That is the hardest job, especially for those drawn to the dark, and the work often goes unnoticed because it happens within. Everyone's lens through which life experience is refracted is so unique and meaningful. This is mine. Elric grew up as an odd but kind, good-hearted, and compassionate child, loved by his mother and father. But everything changed when he was 8 years old. His father was a doctor who frequently practiced secret experiments and had manic episodes where he would paper the house in sigils and symbols drawn in his own blood. The relationship he had with Elric was very special, and at night he would read stories of fantastical history and otherworldly sciences. He educated Elric the best that he could, focusing on character and a tenacious appetite for curious things. His mother was the executive director of a summer camp in Newport, a rural town in northern Vermont. She taught him how to love and interact with others, as well as the importance of a solid moral code. He was fortunate to be the youngest overnight camper in the bunkhouse. It was 1 a.m. on the first night that he struggled to sleep and was visited by a shadowy, intangible, wraith-like creature with a pale, sallow, waxy face and incandescent glowing eyes. This malevolent force slapped him and hissed only the 2 words, "You're mine." The wraith spun itself into a vortex of smoldering blackness. This worming spiral of smoke churned for only a moment before it lurched at his face and forced itself into his mouth, scorching his throat on the way down. Elric was never alone from that moment on. Within the same month, his sister, Lyra, was born. All of his parents' attention shifted to her. So his parents adopted the feral cat that Elric had been feeding to keep him occupied. Elric learned much from the care of this thin black cat with golden eyes. He learned to set aside his selfish desires and do what is best for his charge. The emaciated condition of Loki sparked empathy within Elric, and any time he was with his cat, the daemon inside was blocked from speaking or communicating. So, after much thinking, he took a black obsidian stone from the river at summer camp and covered it with his own blood and a poultice of his own herbs and ingredients. The purpose of this blessed stone was to give all the good parts of Elric's personality or being, while rejecting the darkness. This stone was placed under Lyra's crib mattress as soon as she came home from the hospital. Elric's father sat him down in front of the TV and forced him to watch a graphically detailed kidnapping documentary. He held Elric's shoulders down and bent down into his ear and said, "This is what will happen to your sister if you don't look after her." This moment of dread and trauma followed him for his entire life. If one was looking for characterization of Elric's relationship with his father, one would look no further than a father who loves his son and thinks he knows best, champions safety, but at the same time making you feel unsafe, and a son in constant emotional pain and turmoil who doesn't like being controlled. So he rebelled and wanted to tear down the patriarchy and hail Satan. From this very early age, Elric had felt a dark presence within himself, a snake coiled around his soul, tangled and knotted in his chest. It constricted him with an immeasurable weight, yet remained invisible, like a great shadow living beneath his skin that never felt like his. It was merely a body he was forced into. This presence became known as Aphael, who protected him by granting him her keenly adapted reptilian brain. With it, he could always see the darkness within others. Aphael communicated mainly through electrocuting muscle spasms that were so random he could never grow numb to them. She could also show him harrowing visions or even make him hallucinate. She often influenced Elric to make choices that would darken his soul. She encouraged him to manipulate and exploit his peers. His daemon would whisper yearnings of sacrifice and chaos. She also would punish him with a torrent of pain if he refused her, even when she demanded blood. She urged him to sacrifice frogs en masse to the old gods. This led him to the intense weight of guilt and shame, which Athael enjoyed immensely. She would feed on his negative emotions, leaving him sapped of vitality. Blood magic is the darkest and most seductive of the arts, and it tends to lead to all sorts of fun and quirky habits, one of which is scab eating. Elric obtained at least endorphins, if not actual magic. It did influence his psyche to feel euphoria. The one time he performed a successful sacrificial frog zombie resurrection was by far the darkest magic, and not one that ever needs to be described. That blood magic was all that was available to him. He took control of his life of chaos in the only way he was instructed at the time. He was bound under his skin, bound from using other forms of magic. His demon always insisted on giving him control in the final moments as a way to fuck with his head. He would have perfect clarity in the moments of darkness. It was always his choice, and he chose wrong every time until he decided to change. The original soul inside him started to fight back and learned how to banish and lock her away behind mental walls of psychic bricks. It was not an easy change by any means, but it was firm, drastic, and unyielding. Although Athael did bore a hole into Elric's soul and filled it with empty darkness, she did actually care for him. She comforted his raw nerves and sore muscles after his father's manic rages, and guided him when his father disappeared, leaving only a brief note of apology. It was clear his father was unprepared to face the pain of the journey forward. Years passed after his father's abrupt departure, and by the time he was nearly 18, his mother had remarried, and he had a new, older stepbrother. His relationship with Logan started out as the best of friends. The two went to the movies together and enjoyed underage smoking and jamming out to music in the car together. They tentatively brushed hands in the car, and Elric felt a yearning deep inside. It wasn't long before, on one camping trip, Elric and Logan snuggled up to each other to get warm. Things accelerated rapidly as clothes came off and a relationship blossomed. But who falls in love with their stepbrother? There has to be something off or wrong with him, something that stained his soul and allowed a corruption of character, for that is what this must be. Although it didn't feel wrong, Elric knew instinctively that he was right. The shadow on his soul was real, and he wasn't just imagining it. The truth was far too painful. Suffice it to say that when he was diagnosed with cancer, it may have been shocking, but it made sense. He had given up, and he was ready. He had experienced enough medical torture. Elric had a moment where he asked what his quality of life would be if he stopped the chemotherapy treatment. His white cells were down, and an infection raged through his body with a temperature of 106. His muscles were seizing and locked in a full body cramp. Elric finally had relief from the pain with morphine, but he was still broken from reality. He leapt out of his hospital bed and unhooked his IV and stood at the 4th-floor windowsill. He was hallucinating, and he just wanted to go home and die. A kind nurse took the time to have a moment of softness with him, and that's all it took to get him back in the hospital bed. But just as he thought all hope was lost, he looked to the end of his bed and saw 2 bright, dark amber eyes staring gleefully over the end of his bed. It was his sister, Lyra. She was visiting him in the hospital, and she was so happy to see him. He just had to stay alive for her. He decided in that moment that he would finish treatment and beat this cancer. He had fought hard, and for so long. It seemed that the battle would never end. The pain shattered not only his body, but also what remained of his mind. This poison was taking his memories, his hair, and his identity. It wouldn't stop. He couldn't stop throwing up. He barely made it to the toilet this time. Between the violent torrents of burning bile, he sobbed. Elric's anguished tears cascaded from bloodshot eyes down his throbbing red face into the pool of sickness below. He wanted to yell for help, if only he could catch his breath. But even if he could manage to hold back the emptiness long enough to let out a cry, there was nothing anyone could do. It hurt his mom to watch this. How do I make it stop? What did I do to deserve this? I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Oh God, why is this happening? I'm not even 20 yet. How can I fight something like this? It felt like a race to see which would kill him first, the disease or the poison injected into the port in his chest that led to his heart. It hurt too much not to be real. He wished to fall into unconsciousness as he lay naked and limp across the cold, white porcelain bowl. His ashen body, drenched in sweat, began to stick to the tile floor and the toilet seat. He did not have the strength to hold his head up, so instead, he rested his forehead on his right arm. The bathroom lights above the mirror flickered as he began coughing up thick, acidic fluid again. He couldn't draw breath. He tried to summon his strength to raise his head, but it wouldn't come. His vision became black and spotty as dread and violent convulsions finally peaked. He feared he would pass out and drown in his own sick, suffocating in the burning bile flowing unchecked from his nose and mouth. Elric had only the briefest of moments between violent convulsions to gasp desperately for air. He didn't know if that breath would be enough, but he was alone now, and no one was coming. Then it stopped. Just in time, it seemed. Trembling and weak, he finally managed to reach his shaking left hand to flush the toilet. Elric was disconcerted when he opened his stinging eyes in time to see the amount of blood swirling in the water below as it was sucked down and away. He decided that the appearance of blood was not something to share. It felt best not to worry his family more than necessary. He finally got his wish. The convulsions slowly subsided as he slid off the white porcelain bowl and fell to the tile floor with a wet thump. He fell into the spinning black of unconsciousness. His last thoughts were not of himself, but rather a wish to spare his family the pain of looking at such a disgusting shell of his former self. Apparently, the prognosis and survival rate of his condition was fairly decent if the chemotherapy didn't kill him first. The effect of the slightly less than lethal poison concoctions injected into his chest was horrific. With the first injection, his flesh felt as though it was on fire from the inside. It was excruciating, only to be followed by 2 more. The second brought the cold, sharp sensation of frozen light bulbs exploding in his chest. The tiny frozen shards of glass traveled down his arms, legs, and to his groin. The third poison spread out over hours, making him hold his head in a spinning dizziness. Together, the 3 toxins were meant to kill the vile mutation that had invaded his body, defiling it. He was powerless to stop the cycle of pain. At least that's what was supposed to happen in order to fight the cancer and, more urgently, combat the chemotherapy. He realized that relinquishing control was the only way to survive this. Suffering can make a soul desperate for connection, and there are entities waiting on the other side to slide through the openings of those wounds. Aphael was one such being, feeding on the decay of his soul. The sorry excuse for a body was not his own for now. The gray, swollen bag of flesh and bone with thinning brown hair was something he could hardly recognize. Only his penetrating, bright, loving pond green eyes remained the same, although his gaze seemed to come from far away, distant from the pain. Elric had often pondered why he had such intense green eyes. No one else in his family had them, not a single extended family member or ancestor as far back as he could trace. Despite his body's current prison-like condition, he would still be considered handsome by some. His sculpted jawline and strong nose framed his face in pleasant proportion. His thick, dark hair used to fall just beneath his chin. Now the long stubs of hair was clipped closer to his scalp to lend the illusion of a thicker head of hair. To himself, he just looked like a gray alien, a dehumanized creature that likes to itch wounds into his skin and then eat the scabs. Elric, 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 are you okay? Open the door, called the distant voice of his mother. He slowly raised his head from the tiled floor, shaking off the sleep and the blurred vision. Through the ringing in his ears, it was hard to hear the shaking of the locked doorknob alongside the soft but resounding rapping of her fist on the hollow wood. Her smooth voice began to lose its composure, fraught with concerned pleas for him to open the door. Finally, he was able to claw his way across the warped, tawny tile toward the door. Elric wanted to tell her he was okay, but when he opened his mouth, only an imperceptible hoarse wheeze came out. He stopped to grab his throat with his right hand. He wanted to cry out. He quickly mastered his fear and started again on his forearms and elbows toward the frantic voice just ahead, dragging his weak, useless legs behind him. "Hang on, Mom, I'm coming," Elric replied faintly. To his surprise, he somehow found the strength to flip onto his back and prop himself against the wall. He was still unclothed, save for the singular hand towel covering his most private area. This was just part of the disease and treatment. He had accepted the fact that at some point he would be helpless, and any shame or modesty would be rendered irrelevant by the need for help. He unlocked the door and let her in to assist him. His mother helped him to his feet, wrapping a purple polka-dotted bathrobe around him while ducking under his arm for stability, guiding him to his bed in the room directly across the hallway. She gently lowered his body into the low bed. He was much taller and larger than she, yet it seemed she was the stronger one. He shot her a weak smile through drooping eyes, trying unsuccessfully to mask the wince of pain that shot white-hot up his spine and ricocheted around in his skull. But she responded by carrying him in her warm, dark amber gaze and managing a half-smile as well. "Thank you," came the cracked voice from Elric's raw throat. "Do you need anything before I leave for work?" she asked. "Crushed ice and iced water, please," he croaked. These were the only words he could muster before he thankfully succumbed to the pain and fell into the relief of sleep he so desperately craved.